Some days are simply too much, and regardless of whether you're on deadline or not, there are some days when you just have to accept that life takes the forefront. Example, I was in the middle of writing Firewall last year, and around May, which was the time I was hoping to sort of get some momentum going on the manuscript after numerous delays in getting the story approved. I was finally ready to go, and then life got in the way. My wife's father died.
Oh,
And there
so
were a
sorry.
lot of things that had to be dealt with during the month of May. Uh, my wife suddenly had to go away to Texas to be with her family, but she was also shuttling between Texas and Illinois, which is where her father was going to be buried and where the service was going to be. And then, I had to coordinate her travel arrangements, and there's lots of expenses we didn't expect, and she's taking time off from work, unexpectedly. I have to arrange for cat sitters. I got to arrange to follow her out to Illinois for the services. I got to have somebody to take care of my house. I got to make sure things don't fall apart in my absence. And then there's just the emotional toll of, losing a close family
Exactly.
member,
Yep.
losing my father-in-law hit me very hard.
Mm.
And it was just one of those things where the month of May, the entire month, as a result, was a wash. There was just no way around it. That was the way it was. And trying to pretend that it wasn't that way, trying to pretend that I could just get up, go on, and sit back down and go back to work as if nothing had happened. Just that's crazy.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just
Yeah.
can't do that.
Yeah.
And so I had to accept that the month of May was
Yep.
out the window.
Yep.
And then again, I got back to work in June and July, and I was working along, and I got into August, and I was closing in on the end of the book. I was maybe literally a few. I was tracking the days. I knew my output rate, and I knew that I was within maybe a few days of finishing the manuscript. And I was hoping to even have it done a few days early, ahead of deadline. And then I got COVID last August. My wife had picked it up by accident. She had been traveling into the city and hadn't had access to masks, and she had to take the subway. And subway is basically a giant human bacteria tube.
Yep. Petri
And
dish.
so she brought it home. She got sick. I got sick. And I got really sick. I ended up in the hospital. My first day of COVID, I went to the ER.
Oh, it's terrible.
So it really kicked the daylights out of me. And again, something like that happens, and you can't pretend it doesn't happen. It happens. You hit something like that, hits you. It hits you like a truck, and it takes a little while to get back up to speed. So I lost about a week of time that I wanted to, that I would have spent writing. I suddenly had to focus on not dying. So I did that, got that out of the way, and got myself back to work. And I literally made my deadline by a matter of hours.
Wow.
So I got the book done on time. Technically, legally, if you were to look at delivery time from the contract, yes, delivered on time per contract by a matter of hours.
Wow.
Well, that's amazing. I would love to actually, because you mentioned something there early on, but go to the development of Firewall. So your new book, Star Trek Picard, Firewall. You said you had problems getting the story approved, or was there resistance to something specific in there?
Well, I mean, it's one of those things where when you're dealing with so many different ideas going on, you've got the writer with their idea, you've got the licensor who has their concept, you've got the editor and what they need, and you've got to reconcile these three things. So it's not just a matter of pleasing my editor, it's also a matter of I have to meet the expectations and dictates of the licensor. In this case, Kirsten Beyer, who is a good friend of mine, fellow novelist. Now she's the co-creator of Star Trek Picard. She's worked on several of the recent Star Trek TV live action series. She's working on Starfleet Academy right now. She is the point person right now within Secret Hideout, in charge of vetting and approving novels and comic books and other narrative materials, narrative tie-ins based on the Secret Hideout live action shows. So if it's based on Strange New Worlds, Discovery, Picard, and now Starfleet Academy, Section 31, it has to go through her. She has to approve it. So when I was approached, by SNS, when I met with them back in, December, I think maybe December of 22, 21, I don't remember, somewhere back there, I had a nice lunch with my editors, and I asked, what they needed coming up in the next cycle of books. And they said, would you like to write the story of Seven of Nine joining the Fenris Rangers? How and why? And considering that, the first time I watched the episode Stardust City Rag that established the existence of the Fenris Rangers, I paused the episode. Like, this is the first night it's dropped. I'm watching it. I paused the playback so that I could pick up my phone and email my editor, hey, I'd like to write a novel about the Fenris Rangers. And I get a response back like 5 minutes later saying, we've been told no books about the Fenris Rangers while Picard is still on the air because they don't know what they want to do with it. Mm-hmm. So it was hands off for a couple of years. Yeah. And then suddenly, here's the offer. Do I want to write the story of how and why Seven, instead of joining Starfleet? Why did she get rejected from Starfleet? How and why did she end up with the Rangers? I'm like, well, yeah, I'd love to take that job. I'll take that job. Thank you. And so I'm told, go away, start thinking up an idea. So I go and I start thinking up an idea, but the idea has to get approved by Kirsten. And Kirsten, because she, a lot of people know this already, but I'll reiterate for those who don't know. Kirsten was the author who wrote most of the Voyager books set after the end of series. She picked up pretty much where Christy Golden left off. And she did a whole series of 7 or 8 Voyager novels that dealt with Voyager going back to the Delta Quadrant, with a whole fleet called the Full Circle Initiative or whatever. And so she was very possessive of the Voyager characters in general, and Seven of Nine in particular. Mm-hmm. She had done a lot of work with the character, and although those books are now out of continuity because of Picard, there was still a deep attachment on Kirsten's part to the character of Seven, and she had very clear ideas about how she wanted Seven portrayed in the books, particularly during the era in which Voyager has just come home. Because when we see her in Picard, that's 20 years after Voyager has come home. This is 20 years along. So we're talking about now 20 years earlier. Voyager has just come home. Seven is still fairly young, only about 31, 32. And so she's in a very different place in her life. She's not the character we see in Stardust City Rag. She hasn't lost Icheb yet. She hasn't been hardened by 20 years of vigilante justice. She's not that person yet. And so Kirsten wanted me to adjust certain assumptions I had made in the story. She wanted it toned down. She wanted a lower body count. She didn't want Seven to be a killer. She said that Seven is not that person yet, and she's still going to be very much the person that Janeway has helped her to become, and she's not that ruthless person yet. Life has not beaten her up to that degree yet. But she is starting to get, a taste of what's happening in the world. So there were a lot of things about the depiction of how Seven acts, what Seven believes, and also how we handled the transition of Seven from being what we saw. Her relationships of a romantic variety in Voyager were primarily heterosexual in nature. And now we see that she has embraced queer relationships, lesbian relationships by the time of Star Trek Picard. So clearly she underwent some process of, personal change and growth where, she discovered new things about herself. So that was also part of the story that Kirsten wanted told. Okay. And it was a matter of going back and forth and negotiating and saying, well, we can do this, or I see why you're asking for this, but how about doing it this way instead? So getting the story approved, it wasn't that we had large disagreements over what the story was about. It was about the finer points of how to make sure that it comported with Kirsten's vision and the show's depiction of Seven, while also making sense with who Seven was at the end of Voyager. And just making sure that we all still felt like at the end, it felt like a Star Trek story, while at the same time being a realistic exploration of Seven's psyche during an extremely important and formative period of her life.
That's amazing. And I got to say, you were kind enough to get Trevor and I an advance copy of the book, so we appreciate that. And Trevor and I agree on almost nothing, but we both were like, wow, we came to each other and said, wow, we really like this, so we really appreciate it. But it's talking about the finer point, like I had a funny and a good way reaction. Like just early on, Seven goes to a club and is dancing, and I'm like, has that ever happened before? She goes dancing there. She has a one night stand with an Adorian. Like I'm like, it's much more like everything's like that side of her is there, but it seemed very raw and realistic, and it not something you see in a lot of Star Trek books, unless, correct me if I'm wrong, that you write that other people write. But I think it felt freer in a way, this book. Did it feel that? I mean, am I reading?
It's a very different sort of thing than I've done in a lot of my previous Trek books, and it's different from a lot of other Trek books in that there are really only a small handful of previously established Star Trek canon characters in the book, and that is Seven and Janeway. And to a lesser degree, there's a couple of appearances by characters from Star Trek Prodigy, like Tysus and Dr. Noom, who are canon. But the rest of the story is Seven alone. I mean, she's carrying the whole story by herself, really, in a very big way. But yeah, the whole thing about her going to the club and this exploration of life, the entire point of Firewall as a novel is that it's structured like a classic Bildungsroman or coming-of-age tale. Mm. And the idea behind Firewall is that it's supposed to be, for Seven, a queer normative coming-of-age tale, except that in the fin de siècle, late 24th, early 25th century Federation, being lesbian or whatever is not considered any big deal. That's not going to be a source of stigma to deal with. Yeah. But we find the allegory for that in the fact that because she has Borg implants that she cannot be rid of, because it would kill her if they took them out, she has this sort of mark, this indelible thing that people can see that says,
you're different.
You're different. You are not us. You are an outsider.
You're a secret plant that's going to destroy us all.
Right. So she gets treated with prejudice. When she's first living on Earth. This is a culture that has still just barely survived recent near fatal brushes with the Borg. They're still terrified of the Borg. There's a lot of prejudice. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of anger. So when she starts living there, early in the book, you see she gets her house vandalized. Somebody paints "Die Borg Bitch" on the front of her house. And the cops aren't really interested in doing anything about it. And it's because she has this very visible thing that makes her different and therefore self-conscious. But she can't change. In that respect, it could be an allegory for both prejudice against race, but also it's about prejudice against those who are openly queer, openly different, anything not cis heteronormative. And then you've got the fact that she has this running problem with the Federation, where, for instance, they deny her application to have her citizenship restored. They thought, first of all, they thought she was dead, so you got to bring somebody back from the dead for one thing. That's hard enough. But then she wants, to say, well, I'm not Annika Hansen, I'm 7 of 9. Well, this trips up the Federation because 7 of 9 is a Borg designation. Mm-hmm. And if she's choosing Borg designation, does that mean her sympathies and her allegiances are with the Borg? And if so, doesn't that make her an enemy of the state? So as a result, they wind up tying up her citizenship application. So she can't get citizenship. She's classified as a permanent alien resident. And then on top of that, she can't get into Starfleet because they're paranoid. Is she going to actually be a Borg agent? Is she an infiltrator? Has she been sent all this way just to worm her way in, at Starfleet Academy, Starfleet Command? Sure, she was fine on Voyager, but her Voyager record is full of multiple incidents of violent attempts to escape, violent altercation, attempts to rejoin the Borg Collective, attempts to betray the ship to the Borg Collective. She did this like 3 times. She has multiple infractions that would cause Starfleet Command to go, what? Mm. And you want to give her a commission? Are you out of your minds? So she's getting pushed back from Starfleet. She's getting pushed back from the Federation. But the worst part of all is that because she's chosen this Borg designation, that, again, her very designation, her name, casts her as an outsider. And then she goes, for instance, it says early in the book, she goes to visit her Aunt Irene. And her Aunt Irene can't stop calling her Annika. And no matter how many times she corrects her aunt,